and I love coming here every year, and I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to see familiar faces in the crowd that keep coming back and being a part of all this. Quick bio about myself. I started with Puppet in 2007. I was working for an ISP speakeasy, and we were deploying a national VoIP system. We didn't have any configuration management. We had deadlines that kept getting moved up, right? Like that never happens to you all. And we didn't have the tools or the experience. And we started using Puppet, and we were able to quickly manage our different environments and actually get things done, which we wouldn't have been able to do without the configuration management. So that's how I got started. It was actually solving real problems that we had. After that, I was an early employee at Puppet Labs, and then I moved on to creating my own company where I do consulting, training. I do 2 courses, an intro and an advanced course. I do audits as well as code reviews. Enough about me. How many folks in here are using some sort of configuration management now? Yeah. And how many of those are using Puppet? Great. Is anyone using anything else? You're here to evaluate, or you're just using a bunch of different tools? Who here is using version 3 of Puppet? So most folks, who's already made the jump to version 4? Nobody good, so this is the right talk? Okay, I'm not too late. Who here is using V2 Puppet? Yeah? Yeah.
We're just making the jump to 3 now.
That's okay, you are not alone, working with somebody else that's doing that as well. So, when I started this migration, this is really a story of how I wanted to start supporting Puppet 4 and all of the frustrations and problems that I had making the jump. Since V4, Puppet adheres to semantic versioning. When you have a major version change, that's when you can break functionality. And so, this is where, there's major changes that can break. The very first thing that I noticed was this term AIO. I'm like, what is that? They keep talking about it everywhere. And that's the all-in-one installer. So if you've used Puppet Enterprise or tried that out, that's the tactic that they've been using for years. And so now the open source is lockstep. What that does is instead of multiple packages in a repository, you get this one sort of meta package that has a bunch of software in it. So it's called Puppet Collections, and you'll see its numbering starts with 1 and then just increments, so it's not semantic versioning. Super confusing. The Puppet Agent package is the only package that you would install, and you can see it has all of the software inside it. Who here is familiar with the new software collections from CentOS? Yeah. And so you might be familiar with this. What the package does is it's going to install everything under its own directory structure. And so all this stuff is there. One advantage is that change on the OS, such as a different version of Ruby, isn't going to break your Puppet installation, because now everything is going to all be self-contained. One disadvantage is that if your OS is faster to security updates than the Puppet Labs team is, that can be a risk for you. Although to their credit, they're really excellent at that. The other thing I noticed starting the server is no more Apache and Passenger. Who here is using Passenger and Apache now, right? Who here uses something else? Use like Nginx or uses like WebBrick. So this could be an issue if you're using things like mod proxy to route requests based on the URL. Is anyone doing anything funky like that? Yeah, so that's not really gonna work anymore. Not entirely bad, it just kind of forces you to a simpler infrastructure. So now it's all JVM, Clojure, and JRuby. How many folks here just love working with Java as an admin?
I give the job.
For those at home, let the record state only one hand went up in this room.
He gave the job for
Yeah, and so, yeah, and so I thought the same thing. Puppet DB has already gone to this model, and Ken Barber, the lead developer there, set on the mailing list that it's really helped him be able to quickly debug problems that would be almost impossible to find and fix with just like Ruby. And so they've seen that it's allowed for much faster development. Does this mean Ruby's going away? They're just going to rewrite all of that code? No. Like it's really just the JVM as a container, and then it's using JRuby to interpret all of the Ruby. So don't worry, you probably won't actually have to touch any Clojure or Java. Thank God. So now we're using Ruby 2.1.x. Is anyone here managing a system that uses Ruby 1.8.7 like CentOS 6? Yeah, so almost everybody. That's okay, since the all-in-one installer has its own Ruby like packaged. You know, that's going to allow you to have whatever your default system one is, but then Puppet's going to use its own and still work. Is anyone here managing a Mac Puppet? Yep. So Snow Leopard was released in 2009, and they dropped support for it. That was 10.6, and everything before that. And really what that dropped support for was there was a bunch of different ways that passwords were handled. And so they don't have to maintain all of that old code, as well as some changes in how services were managed. So that stuff got dropped. So after I got it installed, my next question is like, where is everything? It's not where I expected at all. And so hunting around, and things are mostly installed under opt Puppet Labs. Then you have opt Puppet Labs bin, which you'll need to add to your path so that you can potentially run Puppet or Factor. They did a thing that's quite clever in that they have opt Puppet Labs Puppet bin, and this is meant to not be in your path statement. And so this has programs like Ruby and Gem that are supporting things like Puppet and Factor. So if you want to run a version of Gem or something to see, you know, that's specific to your Puppet installation, you can put the path in by hand. Yep, and it doesn't clobber your OS tools. The configuration is in etc Puppet Labs Puppet, which I thought was a long and weird place to put things. But that's because each Puppet-related program has its configuration under etc Puppet Labs. So you'll see like mcollected Puppet server there. If you were running on most OS like distributions were putting the SSL dir for Puppet and varlib Puppet SSL, you probably deleted that directory a lot when you screwed up the certificates. I know I was always doing that. And so that moved under etc, and so that definitely threw me for a loop. So etc Puppet Labs Puppet SSL is now where all of that lives. So under the etc Puppet Labs, besides the application-specific configuration, there's a code directory. It seems to me like we're really polluting etc, but yeah, that's where it's living at today. We have hardware configuration as well as hardware data. So before you might have had things under varlib hira, now that's all at C PubLabs code. There's static modules as well as your environments. Here was using the directory-based environments in Puppet 3. We got like etc Puppet environments, production, dev, stuff like that. Yep. So it just changed the directory path, but that still works the same. Here was using static environments, and in their Puppet conf, they had like an environment block that said environment dev, and here's some path. Was anyone doing that? Great, because that's not the way to get it. So with these environments, they are always accessible. The directory comes into creation. You can access it. You don't have to restart the master or add any configuration. And it plays really well with R10K. How many folks here are using R10K now to manage their code? Yeah. So for everyone that's not, I think I should check out my slides from last year about managing modules and get on the R10K bandwagon here. It's really going to make your life a lot simpler. There was many type and provider improvements. A very short list is just there was huge improvements to Windows, SUSE, FreeBSD, OpenBSD, Mint, Yum, Systemd, ZFS, Pacman, Gem. I think you're using probably something in that list, and it got marginally better. So facts have always been strings, and so you run factor, and whatever that output is always a string. In later versions of Puppet 3, they introduced the ability to set stringify facts to false. Has anyone played with that? And by setting the stringify facts to false, what it did was give you structured data. So you could have an actual array instead of just a string, or you could have a hash or a boolean. We here had to take facts and then it was like parsing them in your templates or something. Yeah. So now this is the default with Puppet 4, is that all facts are structured data. So here's an example of the OS fact. I've given it --YAML output just to make it a little easier to see the data type. But we see that OS is a hash, and it has keys, name, family, and that a release is a subhash. And so this just shows the structured data approach. And then you can access, individual pieces of this, as opposed to before there was just a ton of different fact names, and they were all strings, and you had to convert types. Give a moment to check out this code. So here I have a class, and I've got a class parameter bar, and I have a default value is true. And then I've got all this other code to deal with type conversion, right? Because what if you pass me true as a string, because you got it from factor and it's only strings. And so here I'm saying if bar is a string, then I'm going to run string to bool to turn it back into a boolean. Else I'm just going to leave it alone. And then just to be sure, I'm going to validate that it's a boolean. All right, so now I've got all this code to handle that like that. Have people seen this pattern before or used this pattern? When you saw that true wasn't actually a boolean and a bit, yeah. Like we had to do all sorts of type conversions, and the string and the structured facts are going to help us a bit with that. Something else that's new are templates with EPP. So we used to use ERB to process templates, and Puppet variables were based as Ruby variables within the ERB. Now with EPP, you can use the new, but I guess familiar Puppet language to handle your templates. ERB still exists. The template function still uses ERB, so you can keep doing what you were doing. And if you want to use the new way, you can use the EPP function, and it'll parse EPP files. Yeah. I'm hoping that Puppet Labs will add more documentation for EPP, which appears sadly to be missing from the docs as I went through it this morning. A big change with the language is iteration, which is accomplished with lambdas, which are just it's function based. So now we have .each, right? So who here has ever sat with the Puppet code? You're like, how do I go through a list of things? You're like, you don't. And so now we have .each. When Puppet started, there was this idea that every resource in your code could then be translated to a resource in the catalog that was going to be applied to your system. But really, that idea has been gone for years now, as we've had create resources along with defined types. So for years, you've been able to use create resources, call a defined type, and have it create data. Now it's a bit easier to use .each. Here's an example of it in action. Here I've got a list, and I'm using the each function on the list. The other syntax probably looks similar to Ruby. You can see I've got an index that's going to be incremented and then the value. And so this code would produce this result. So make sense what's going on here. You can also, instead of using it like the classical function with each and parentheses and your arguments, you can use it more similar to Ruby with .each. And so this is actually calling dot in the function on that piece of data. So here, notice I didn't have to say $list equals. I could just say here's some data, which is new, and then .each. And again, it's going to have the same output. So in the past, data transformation, you probably did it with custom Ruby functions. Has anyone ever done that before? Yep. Or who's created a template so that they can munge data and do transformations within the template, right? And that's super fun, right? And so now there's other lambdas to help with the data transformation, so you can do it directly in the language as opposed to having to, go to these other mechanisms that look like magic to the users. The next thing that got me was typecasting. So you can specify the type for your parameters, and if the data isn't in that type, then you get a compilation error. And so we're back to this piece of code again. So this was like really standard. Bar is true, and then if somebody throws me a string, I'm going to make it true, or make it a Boolean. I have to validate everything. And so I found that a huge section of my code is just this. I'm validating all of my inputs, right? We never want to trust what people give us. We want to validate, and then I'm possibly doing type conversions. And so for classes that have a lot of parameters, this is a considerable amount of code you have to keep up with. Now I can, and this is optional, so your code that doesn't specify this, like this code still works in Puppet 4, but now I can put in front of the variable, I can typecast it. And so here I'm saying Boolean bar equals true. And so now Puppet is going to enforce that bar is a Boolean. So if you pass bar as something else, it's going to fail with the compilation error. And so all of this code now I can just get rid of and replace by just saying I want a bar to be a Boolean all along, right? I think this is huge for code simplification and reduction. I think they did a really good job at this. When I first saw it, I thought, oh, they're really making things complicated, and now I've got to do all this typecasting. But what I found through practice is that it really is going to allow me to eliminate a bunch of code, a bunch of checks. I can just say at the beginning, here's what I want it to be. Here are the core data types. So this list should look pretty familiar. Notice we have things like regex on there. They also introduced this idea of abstract data types, which provide more flexibility with matching as well as restricting data. So upgrading. You're running Puppet 3 or version 2, or not at all, and like, how do you get from there to form? And so I'm a big proponent of never upgrading in place. By doing so, you could cause downtime if it doesn't work right, and then you have this mad scramble of, well, I upgraded my thing and now I got to get all my agents to work, and you're imposing this window on yourself. I'm a fan of this idea of immutable infrastructure, and so the idea is you don't make the changes, but instead you would just deploy a new service. And that's what I would suggest that everyone do. Leave your current systems intact, create new Puppet masters, and then you can install the new installer on your systems, port them to the new Puppet masters, on a time frame that makes sense for you, as opposed to, well, I just upgraded everything to Puppet 4, so now we got to go hit all the agents and hope it all works today. You give yourself a better schedule that way. So I manage a bunch of very common modules that you would use on, a lot of systems. I found that through doing consulting, I would spend a lot of time, just doing these basics everywhere before we could actually get into your application. And so now I just maintain a bunch of these core modules so that when I go into an environment like the base system, it's just done, and then we can focus on the thing that makes it useful for you. So I've got all these things that I'm like committed to, and this is really just, again, my story of how do I get all this stuff to work with Puppet 4. It's here, and I want to be compatible. And I want to keep compatibility with version 3 as well, because it'll be, I think, a while as people make the switch. How many people have their code public on GitHub? Seriously? How about another public service? People afraid to have their code in public because it might not be awesome?
Yes.
Yeah? There's this idea that if you're not embarrassed of your first release, you waited too long to release it. So it's better to get in the practice of just getting your code up there and making the changes, and then it's just the way you work, as opposed to saying, I don't want people to see that. Even your super bad code is going to help other people, as well as help yourself. So since not that many folks raise their hands, I totally encourage you to do that. If it's because you're not familiar with newer tools like Git, there's Git talks going on here. If somebody wants to learn about Git, I'll teach them after the class. But definitely your code needs to be where people can use it. How many people are using other people's modules? Okay, that's good. Developer, like you want to actually develop as little as possible and use other people's code, so I encourage you to do that. How many folks are I wanted to see that they would all work. I thought that if I was lucky, you know, I would just add Puppet 4 and V3 with the feature parser to my code and everything would just work. Yeah, not quite the case. Travis for me is testing a few things. It's testing the metadata is properly formatted. It's testing the style with Puppet lint. It's testing syntax validation. So will this work on Puppet 4? And it's also running my RSpec tests. So I had to modify the spec helper and put in this little chunk of code. What this is doing is configuring the Puppet master to use the feature parser if an environment variable is found. So if I set RSpec is going to tell Puppet to use the feature parser. With Travis, I can set environment variables and that gets passed on. So for my matrix, I test every version of Puppet 3 and 4 explicitly that I'm supporting, as well as, you see the bottom line is just 4. So it's going to use the newest version of 4. So 4.2 gets released tomorrow, then Travis will start testing it. And then we see parser equals future. I'm testing the latest version of version 3 with the feature parser. So this is going to create a matrix formate with Travis CI to test multiple versions of Ruby against these multiple versions of Puppet and to make sure my code is actually interoperable between all of those. I personally still support Ruby 1.8.7 because I have a bunch of folks that use that, like CentOS 6, as well as 1.9.3, 2.0 and 2.1.0. How many people have spec tests? Oh no, because a few of you were in my class about spec tests. All right, so even if you don't have spec tests, setting up this Travis or private like Jenkins instance is super useful because you can still do the syntax validation as well as the style validation. So even without RSpec tests to test what your code is supposed to do, you can at least just see, will my code compile under V4 or is it going to fail? So I started doing that after I banged my head on the keyboard for a while to get Travis to actually work. You know, I started testing some code, and I noticed first off, resource overrides. So does anyone see anything wrong with this code? I hope not, because in version 3, this is totally legit. In version 4, this is not. So this is what works in version 4. Did anyone catch that? Yeah. And so that space there, it's not happy with. So in V4, that's the way the language works now. So okay, fix that. You know, repushed my code. See what Travis is going to fail on next. failed on this next, which is the type function. Who here uses the type function now in their code from standard lib? Yeah. So type just tells you the type of a variable. So it would tell you like string, hash, array, boolean. So I use it all over the show, and now I get this problem type is now a reserved word. But you put it in standard lib, Puppet, why is it now reserved? Okay, all right. So they just did the clever approach of, well, let's just rename the function to type 3x. Same code, like different name. So for standard lib, how many folks are using like version 3 something of standard lib? Version 4? Who knows the tool installs like whatever version? So you're going to need to start using Public Lab standard lib version 6.0, 4.6.0. That's where type 3x was introduced. Yeah, and you want to make sure if you're doing the RSpec test to update your fixtures YAML as well, so that the tests actually pull in the right version of standard lib. Other things that threw me for a loop when upgrading my standard lib is that validate absolute path. Who here has used that function? Who here has been validating their inputs? Oh no, you can't trust what those users send you. They'll send you all sorts of garbage. So we always want to validate the inputs. Validate absolute path now accepts arrays instead of just strings, which is very cool, but also broke all my spec tests where I was passing it arrays and hoping that it would fail, and then suddenly they worked. Awesome, but I had to go back and change my code. The error codes changed ever so slightly, which again broke a ton of my spec tests. When you're writing your spec test, you also want, if your manifest is supposed to fail, like for instance, if you only support version 6 and 7 of CentOS, and you fail if it's not 6 or 7, right? If I say I'm CentOS 5, it should fail. You want to check that those errors actually happen. Same with your types. So here I got this error, which you can't read on the screen here in the room, I'm guessing, but it's saying my regex that starts with caret, so the beginning of the line, true is not a string, and it fails because the error message changes, and now it tells you a bunch of other junk, and then it says true is not a string. So the fix was simple. I just had to get rid of that caret. But if you were being very explicit in your regexes about what the message is, and you're saying it needs to begin with this and end with this, that could also cause errors for you. For me, it was an easy fix, but a fix I had to do a ton of. Next is templates. This threw me off. Who here's been seeing all those deprecation warnings that say, you know, you need to start putting the @ sign in front of your variable? Well, version 4, those are actually deprecated now. So if you haven't gone back and cleaned up that code, it's going to break. So make sure you do that. So in your ERB files, when you're using a Puppet variable, you just put the @ sign in front of it. So make sure you have, @bar instead of bar. I had one module that used inline templates. Does anyone use any inline templates? And so my syntax validation didn't check that because it's inline, it's in the manifest. So I had to go back and change those as well, which was a wake-up call for me. I didn't realize I had that in one of the modules, and stop using inline template. It's better to always use a file because your syntax validation knows, oh, there's a .erb, I'm going to parse that correctly. Whereas if it's just mixed in with your code, then it's not getting the same syntax validation. Who here uses node inheritance? Yeah? You gotta cut that out. It's been a bad idea for years, and now it's finally officially a bad idea as it's no longer supported. So for those not familiar, node inheritance, I could have a node such as node common, and then I could have another node that inherits that node. So just like inheriting classes, I could do this. This was really used and abused, especially early on with Puppet, and what it led to was this rat's nest of dependencies where you really couldn't tell what classes were being applied to nodes. Who here uses the roles and profiles type approach to their code? Yeah. And so if you are using this, I highly recommend checking out Craig Dunn's roles and profiles. That will really help you out. Speaking of node classification, who here uses a site manifest and lists all their nodes statically? Who uses an ENC, such as Foreman or the old dashboard, or they've written their own? How many folks are doing that? How many folks are classifying data within HiRed using HiRed include to classify data? Yeah, so a few folks there. That's really the way to go. I'm a big advocate of when you create the system to tag it with certain bits of data, such as a role, and then when it comes into existence, we can, based on that data, use HiRed include to associate classes with it. And so whether you're doing physical systems and putting data on there or VMs, you can inject that data, and then when it comes up, it's just in that role. If you're using an ENC or the old static-based systems, then what you're doing is you have to know the name of the node and input that in before it can really be useful. And that's not really a scalable approach to know what all your systems are before you have them. So a quick upgrade checklist. You need to set up some sort of testing environment and then just keep testing. My approach is to go one role at a time. Are folks familiar with like the roles and profiles approach? A bit. So let me talk about that briefly. So the role is every system has exactly one role, and so that is how you would classify the system in sort of the business use case. Like this is a mail server, this is a web server, this is a database server, right? Your profiles then are a collection of the classes that make that technology work. So every system has exactly one role. That's what it does. And I would advocate that you go one role at a time when you're doing your upgrades, and pick what's simple, right? Don't pick a role because, well, 80% of my systems are web servers, so let's port that over. Start with not what's the most important, but or the most in numbers, but start with the simplest role that you have, right? We want to start simple and have small successes and build up. So start with the simple role, see what all the classes are that make up that role, and then again, start with the simplest modules and work your way through it. And then you're going to get a whole role transferred to the new Puppet 4, and then go to the next role, and so on. And then hopefully by the time you get to the more complicated roles, you've already ported most of their code over, and so it becomes easier and easier to make those. You also don't want to probably use the most profile or high profile systems on your network to like go first, right? Like that's not where you want to make your mistakes. So I hope this helps you embrace the changes in Puppet version 4 without getting burned up by dragons and frustrations like I did. And thanks for having me. Open for questions. Again, this is being streamed, so if you just raise your hand and we'll pass the mic around. I'm sure someone has a question. No, everyone's ready to go rock out Puppet v4. Something that's really helped me is I use the Vagrant, and I personally got a CentOS like 7 system because that's what I like to use, but I encourage you to get Vagrant, play with Puppet 4 there. It's a really simple way to get going and test your code locally.
So I was just looking at Fedora packaging for Puppet 4 has paths that are not, as you described, all in one installer. Is that?
Oh, that's interesting that Fedora would do that. So I have always recommended don't get your packages from the OS distribution, get them straight from Puppet Labs. So that's great that you bring that up. So Puppet has yum and apt.puppetlabs.com that you can rsync. So if you don't have web access, from your networks, you can pull that in like locally, and then that has all the packages you need there. So definitely use that one and not your distro.
So I'll follow up with a second Fedora really quick. Do you know about DNF support?
Sorry, I can hear you.
Okay. I should eat the microphone. Do you know about DNF support? Because yum is bye-bye. Fedora.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
It's still young packages.
Yeah, no, it's still yum packages, but like I'll confess I'm using a different configuration management system for a lot of things in Fedora and DNF. Even though it's still the same packages, the mechanisms are not. It's not pretty.
You mean like when you use Puppet to actually turn it into
Yes.
packages?
Yeah, I think about this package kit, so it's probably better off. Just curious.
Like any other questions? All right. Well, thanks for having me then. Again, if anyone wants to chat afterwards, I'll be around. And a quick plug for my conference is FosseCon. And so FosseCon happened last year in Orlando. And it's going to be happening again November 19th through the 21st. So hope to see you there in Orlando. November is a great time to be down there. Yep. Thank you. Come by the booth and say hi to Brian or myself. Yes.
Citrix Zen Server gives you everything you need to integrate, manage, and automate a virtual data center, all on an enterprise-class, cloud-proven virtual platform, and at a third of the cost of other solutions. But why even bother with virtualizing your server infrastructure in the first place? Well, let's say you have a traditional one server to one application architecture, but you're running out of resources and performance is suffering. Once you order new server hardware, you'll wait for delivery, configure it, install your business application, stage and test the server, and finally, add it to your production farm. If you've been through this process before, you know it can take weeks or even months. You also know it's a manually intensive process that will burden your team every time you outgrow your current setup. With a virtual server solution, you could accomplish all of that in less than half a day. Server virtualization software separates the OS and application from the underlying server hardware. And with multiple virtual machines on a single server, you can use each of them to run different OSs and applications. This makes it possible to move your virtual machines from one piece of hardware to another whenever you want, to maximize utilization, simplify maintenance, or recover from a hardware failure, and without slowing down your applications or users. Clearly, server virtualization provides big benefits, and Citrix Zen Server provides even more. Since it's built on an open platform, Zen Server plays well with your existing hardware, storage systems, and IT management software, as well as with the industry's leading cloud service providers. Best of all, you can get started by downloading a fully functional, production-ready version of Zen Server for free. After a 10-minute installation process, you'll see how easy it is to start virtualizing your workloads and automating your IT management processes. And when you're ready for a richer set of management tools, just upgrade to one of the premium editions of Zen Server. So whether you're interested in virtualizing servers for the first time, expanding your server virtualization footprint, or moving server workloads to the cloud, download and install Zen Server today and see how it can help you simplify your IT environment. Citrix Zen Server. Do more. Don't spend more.
Your customers rely on your website or application. If it's slow or non-responsive, it infuriates your users and costs you money. Keeping your business-critical systems humming along requires insight into what they're doing. Your system metrics tell stories that can reveal performance bottlenecks, resource limitations, and other problems. But how do you keep an eye on all of your system's performance metrics in real time and record this data for later analysis? Enter Longview, the new way to see what's really going on under the hood. The Longview dashboard lets you visualize the status of all your systems, providing you with a bird's-eye view of your entire fleet. You can sort by CPU, memory, swap, processes load, and network usage. Click a specific system to access its individual dashboard, then click and drag to zoom in on choke points and get more detail. Comprehensive network data, including inbound and outbound traffic, is available on the Network tab, and disk writes and free space on the Disks tab, while the Process Explorer displays usage statistics for individual processes. The System Info tab shows listening services, active connections, and available updates. Adding Longview to a system is easy. Just click the button, copy the one-line installation command, then run the command on your Linux system to complete the process. The agent will begin collecting data and sending it to Longview. Then the graphs start rolling. Use Longview to gain visibility into your servers, so when your website or app heats up, it stays up.